Thank you for joining us today for this talk with Mike Curato. My name is Mike Bolognino, and I'm a product marketing manager, and I'll be moderating this talk. For those of you who aren't familiar with him, Mike's an award-winning author illustrator of children's books. His debut picture book, Little Elliot, Big City, has won numerous awards, including Ezra Jack Keats' New Illustrator Honor and the Society of Illustrators Founders Award, and has been translated into 14 different languages and sold around the world. Mike's also he's illustrated books written by others, including Worm Loves Worm by J.J. Austrian, all the way to Havana by Margarita Engle, What If, one of my personal favorites, by Samantha Berger, and The Power of One by Trudy Ludwig. In September, his debut young adult graphic novel, Flamer, was released to much critical success. Drawing on his own experiences and telling a difficult story with humor, compassion, and love. Flamer is the story of Aiden, a chubby teenage, half Filipino, half white kid who is away at scout camp the summer before his first year of high school in 1995. Aiden has to navigate friendships, bullying, racism, and body image, all while confronting his sexual identity. So we're going to get into that and a lot more. Let's meet Mike and welcome him to Google. Everyone, please welcome Mike Curato. Hey, Mike. Hi, thank you for joining.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Of course. So I figured that, to get things warmed up, we could do a little word association game. I know you and I are both big fans of RuPaul's Drag Race. And so I figured I would shout out a queen's name, and then you respond with the first word that comes to your mind. For those of you at home, Mike has not seen this list. So let's just see what happens, and then we'll talk about what we're here to talk about. Okay. So, all right. The first queen on the list is Raven.
Ooh, eyes.
Eyes. Shangela.
Hallelujah.
Shea Coulee.
Queen.
Katya. Empress and Queen. 2 words. Katya.
Is Russian prostitute? Can I say that?
That's fine. How about Jujubee?
Oh, that's my word. Oh.
Okay. Mimi, I'm first, going way back.
Ooh, contact sports.
Contact sports. It's not football. Alyssa Edwards.
Oh. Everything.
Everything.
That's my word.
Okay. What about Mama Ru? RuPaul.
Mama Ru. Well, I guess you said mama, so I can't say mother. But
call her mother. That's fine.
Yeah.
Okay. And last but not least, Jessica Wilde.
Jessica Wilde. Absolute acai.
Naturally. All right.
I love this drink.
Thank you, everyone, for witnessing that. I think we're officially warmed up and ready to go. So, Mike, let's start with an introduction in your own words. We know Flamer is a really personal story, and like I said, it's drawn from some personal experiences. Tell us a little bit about where and how you grew up.
Sure. Well, I grew up outside New York City in the suburbs, and I'm half Filipino. My dad was an immigrant, and my mom is first-generation Irish. And I went to Catholic school for elementary and middle school, and then went to public high school. And art and writing have always been a part of my life. I always knew I wanted to be an artist.
How did you know, and when?
I just always drew, like always. I just always had a pencil or a crayon in my hand, and I loved telling stories. And I started writing when I was little also, even though art's always been like my first love. But my writing was usually like very personal stuff. And then I rediscovered my love of children's books when I was in college, and I knew that's what I wanted to do. And I actually wanted to make comics when I was in high school. Okay. I thought that's what I would do when I grow up. So now I do both.
Okay. So this has been brewing for a while.
Yes. Yeah.
And so one thing I'm curious about then, your children's books are not necessarily personal. So what was it like to go into this realm where, you're saying you used to write very personal stories? What was it like to translate something so personal into Aiden's story? What did you notice?
Yeah, well, I think the picture books that I've written are personal in a general sense. Like, there are experiences and feelings that I've had that I put into my picture books, but Flamer is way more personal because the character Aiden really reflects who I was as a teenager. I didn't see myself in books. I didn't see half Asian, half white kids ever. You'd rarely see a chubby kid as like the protagonist in a story. Usually they were like the comic relief or sidekick or something like that. And growing up, I had no gay role models. I had no one to look up to, let alone any gay peers that I could look to be like, oh, well, how are they dealing with it?
Right.
Yeah, which is why I think that queer representation is so important in youth literature, because that population is really underserved right now.
No, absolutely. And so I guess on that note, like, tell us a little bit about like the actual process of kind of collecting let me back up. So there's kind of like there's a story, and then there's messages, and all of that wrapped up into a single book. So how did you approach it in terms of it being like a personal story, but then also like having that gay element that you wanted to share and make available to kids that wasn't previously available?
Yeah, well, it really, this is a bit of a spoiler alert, but there is suicide ideation in the story.
Right.
And I talk about it in the afterword, but I had suicidal thoughts when I was a teenager, when I was, feeling really confused and really scared. And that summer before high school was really pivotal for me. I was transitioning from Catholic school to public school. And, teen suicide is a big problem. It's an increasingly large problem, especially with the advent of social media, because people are being terrorized online. It's not just in school, where when you and I were in school, maybe we'd just be staring at the clock, be like, okay, I just have to make it like 3 more hours and I'm out of here. As opposed to being harassed like 24/7.
So, and I'm curious though, on that note, like what did you hope to offer for the kids of today?
Right. So I guess my point was to, tell this story kind of surrounding my experience with suicide ideation, and kind of the turning point for me as a sort of lifeline to kids today. Because even though things have changed, things haven't changed, right? There's still a lot of common experiences that queer youth have today. And I think it's really important to have books and films and TV shows that can act as that lifeline to someone who doesn't have community until they find that community. It's really important to have someone or something to look to that validates them as a human being, if no one else is around to do that. So that was the crux of the story. Everything revolved around that moment in the plot. And aside from that, I just kind of did this mind dump of memories and feelings that I experienced, and things that I wanted to share, things I wanted to get across.
Yeah.
Things that I didn't have as a reference point when I was 14. I was trying to get that all in there. But everything went to support that critical moment for Aiden.
Yeah. So you packed a lot in. It sounds like you've got this, like your intent of the book, and then you've got the whole personal side of the book. So in terms of the memory process, tell us a little bit about like how do you go about starting? Like what's the starting point for writing a book about that has personal elements, or writing a graphic novel more specifically? Where do you start?
I think you have to dig deep into the past, and I think some really great advice that I got from my editor years ago was the mark of a good story is that it has elements of truth to it, right? There's something that people can connect with on an emotional level. So in order to write any kind of book, this is a fictional book, but it needs to have some truth to it. So a lot of the process was going back to the most uncomfortable moments of my life and writing about that, and writing about what I could remember and how I felt. And one tool that I had was one of my best friends, Laura, who the book is dedicated to,
right?
Who is my real life Violet. Violet is Aiden's pen pal in the book, and Laura was my real life pen pal.
Yeah.
And she scanned every single letter I ever wrote her.
That's amazing. Wow.
So I was actually able to get into my 14-year-old head. And I also found some embarrassing journals.
Sorry, I say that again.
Oh, I also found some pretty embarrassing journals from that time.
Right.
So it was great having the firsthand account.
You had
jogged my memory.
Source materials were available, which
that's right.
That's very lucky.
And also, even though the character in this book is 14, I included experiences that maybe I had throughout my young adult life, and kind of shoved some things in there. So even though Aiden is very much, based on me, he's definitely unique. And I like to think he's a lot more courageous than I was when I was his age.
In what ways?
I think he's a lot more honest with himself than I was ready to be. I think I knew that I was different, and I had an inkling of why I was, but it was something I was in deep denial about for a very long time, and something I was too afraid to admit to. And he does things in the book that I would have never.
Well, I'm curious about that because I know you as a person, right? And then my own experience as a gay kid. Of course, I read the book through my own lens, right? And I saw Aiden stand up for himself at certain times in ways where I felt like, for me, I was impressed, or ways that I wish I could have, coached my younger self to respond. So tell us a little bit about that. Was that you, or was that Aiden? What's in there?
I think, it's a mix. I think learning how to stand up for myself was a lifelong process.
For sure.
And he struggles at it, but he finds his way, right?
Right.
And go ahead.
I just want to say, I also noticed that he used to stand up for himself. It was humor, and it was compassion, and of course it was frustration as well, but it was a real mix of different tools.
He uses his words, and maybe at one point he does get physical as well, in a
True.
self-defense kind of way.
Yes.
So I want to empower youth to be able to defend themselves because they're worth defending.
For sure, and that came through clearly in the book. And actually, on that topic, the book itself obviously is a graphic novel. And one thing I noticed, Mike, is that throughout there is use of color, but it's very specific.
Yeah.
And the title of the book is Flamer, and we'll get into that in a little while. But this concept of fire and heat, emotion, it represents so many different things. And so tell us about your choice of using color in an otherwise black and white text.
Yeah, well, it took me a while to develop the style, but I knew off the bat that I wanted the art to feel kind of raw and rough, to kind of go along with the the mood of the story. And I know we're going to talk about the title in a little bit, but I knew right away, or like towards the beginning when I was writing it, what it would be called. And so there were all these ideas about fire and what that could represent, how it can represent fear and anger, to love and passion, to power, inner power, inner strength. There are a lot of references within the book. One of my favorites is to Phoenix from X-Men, which of course, the symbolism of the phoenix is like an ancient symbol of rebirth. And that's definitely something that resonated with me as a kid, because I was a huge comic book fan and a huge X-Men fan. And so that's an example. There's also a lot of Catholic iconography built into it. Aiden is a very religious kid, and he just wants to be a good person. And we talked a little bit about intersectionality earlier, but I think it's more common than not that people have multiple identities, and they aren't always harmonious. And part of our life's journey is trying to reconcile the different aspects of who we are.
Absolutely. And like you said, Aiden is religious. He's half Filipino and half white. He's soon to be a high school student. He's pudgy, and he's coming to terms with his sexuality. Like you said, so many different identities. And one line in the book that really stood out to me, Aiden says, "I'm always checking the other box, and I'm so over it." So tell us a little bit about that line and how it works with identity.
Yeah. It's definitely something I felt as a kid, and something I still feel as an adult. When you're not part of the mainstream, I don't think there's anything wrong with that, obviously, but there's a constant reminder of, oh, don't forget you're different. Like you could be in a space and not even be thinking sometimes, but like, oh, I'm different in these ways. Like you actually feel like a part of the group, and then something happens where people are like, oh, but you are not completely one of us per se. And it's like, okay, thank you for for reminding me. And that plays out in lots of different ways, right? There's sexuality, there's race, there's religious beliefs, there's just the politics. I mean, you could go on.
For sure. And I guess another thing that stood out to me was a lot of the identities you just listed are very obvious visually, right? Right. But then something like your sexuality isn't always obvious, or isn't obvious. And in the book, several times it felt like almost like other people were noticing that piece, that part of Aiden, Like bullies, of course, somehow seem to know things, like maybe subconsciously, right, that we don't even know ourselves. But then
Yeah.
also some of the camp counselors, gave Aiden encouragement in a kind of wink and a nod kind of a way. So I found it interesting that there's also this kind of like unseen identity.
Right. Yeah, I think I think bullies prey on other people's insecurities, right?
Yep.
So even though I wasn't like out and proud or even really understood what being gay or queer meant when I was 14, it was something that people like sniffed out right away. And
For sure.
and I did find myself, I mean, it's interesting. The concept of sexuality like isn't necessarily something visual, but a queer person can have certain visual traits or behaviors that might indicate like which way they're leaning in the spectrum. And so I was definitely like that. I'm a person that can lean kind of femme. You can tell by maybe my voice or certain reactions I have or things I'd say. Like these are all things that came to me naturally, and I didn't really understand like what people were coming for me about. It's like I'm just going about my day. Like I'm not trying to take anything away from you, or I don't know. But we're trained at a young age that there are acceptable behaviors. And that it was not acceptable where and when I grew up to behave the way I did, which was, it's not even like I was sexually active at all.
I totally know what you mean. I was accused of being seen at a gay bar in 5th grade. I didn't even know what that was.
Right.
So, totally get it.
Yeah, even that word gay, I didn't understand what that meant. I just knew it was used in a derogatory manner towards me, and it meant something bad, right? Yeah. And so I'm like, well, I'm not bad, so I'm not gay. And that's kind of, and Aiden goes through this thought process in the book also. Yes. And then, we're talking about representation. My earliest representations of a gay man was the AIDS crisis.
Yep.
Right. And so gay men were skinny white guys.
Yep.
That's all I had to work with. And, and my church is telling me like, well, they're dying because they are sinners.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, well, I got that note.
Yep.
So there's just all this self-hatred too that is learned from all that I'm still undoing.
For sure.
As are many queer people.
For sure. So, but I mean, now you've created this manual that, gives kids all these different windows, whether it's the gay identity or, any other identity. It gives them all these windows into someone else's experience. And I think that that's so important. And on that topic, it's kind of a universal story, right? Like this story is very specific, but it also is a story I think that could impact people who maybe aren't gay or who aren't mixed race. So, yeah.
I have heard from people who didn't have Aiden's specific experience, but they said there's something about the story that really resonated for them. And I think, it is about being true to who you are.
Yeah.
And being scared of who you are, but then ultimately learning how to accept who you are, and how to love yourself when others are telling you that you are undeserving of that love, which I think is a very common human experience.
Absolutely.
Regardless of your orientation. Absolutely. Or your race.
And I know from following you on Twitter also that there are some young gay or questioning kids who have been impacted already on the book. What's it been like to see essentially real-time feedback on social media since you launched.
I mean, that's really what's made it all worthwhile. I mean, I've worked on this book for years.
Yeah.
I think I started writing it in 2011.
Wow.
And just to know that it's helping someone it's really important to me. So,
well, I'm glad that you get that feedback. I'm glad that that's making its way to you.
Yeah, I appreciate it.
And I guess the social media is so important, not only for feedback, but also, you're launching a book in the times of COVID. So a traditional book tour is not quite on the agenda. So
right. Oops.
Tell us about what it's like to launch and promote a book virtually.
I think there are pros and cons. I think, one thing I really miss about the in-person tour is, actually meeting people in person and
Right.
getting to hear from people right away and kind of having that bonding moment with folks.
Yeah.
But I think there have been some advantages to the tour being virtual. For example, some conferences that would traditionally be paid in person ended up being free online. And so you had much higher attendance during the sessions, and also had a greater pull nationally. You had people showing up from all over the country. Whereas, take, for example, there was Book Expo America and BookCon, which is usually like a half-week long convention in New York City every year. It's like the biggest American, book selling event.
Yeah.
And, maybe in person at that convention, having a panel, maybe we would have gotten like 50 people, but 650 people showed up online. And we don't really have, I mean, it's always a mystery to see that conversion, to see okay, how many of those people actually purchased the book, especially if it's not like they're buying through Zoom, that we could track that. But one would hope that with more attendees, that might mean more sales.
Yeah.
So that's been one benefit. And you have an audience that's like interested in looking for something to do. Like, I'm stuck at home.
Yeah, right.
I know I love books. I know I love these types of books. So, marketing directly to those people on social media, a lot of them are inclined to tune in because there's nothing else to do.
You got your audience, captive audience, yes.
Yeah, exactly. And there's I think a little bit of a carrot also, that you can interact with the audience still. You can still have a Q&A
in a different way, but you're still
yeah, but people are still able to like ask questions, and so that's been really great.
Excellent.
Yeah.
So some good things and some, different things. Okay. So yeah, I want to make sure we have time for questions. Just a few more questions from me. One in particular is about the book title, right? So Flamer. Tell us a little bit about, you started to, but give us the picture on how you came up with it, how it was received initially. Just tell us about the title.
Sure. I mean, I think as most people would know, Flamer, it can be a derogatory term, right? It's like maybe not as bad as the other F word to describe gay people, but it's up there. It's definitely something that's been said about me when I was a kid. And I love that it has different meanings to it.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of that play on the word, there's a play on imagery throughout the book where it's like you think it's one thing, but it's actually the other. So yeah, it just, everything kind of clicked. And it's kind of a chicken and egg sort of thing. I haven't gone back through my notes to see if I had the idea for the title before I was working with all the fire imagery or vice versa. But yeah, so I think the important thing about the title and the visual imagery of fire is that something that could be destructive is actually used to build something beautiful, used to represent strength. Yes.
And it really comes through in such a beautiful way. I think I left the book with a different interpretation of the word flamer. I think you give it its own very unique definition in this story, because like you said, it's kind of this, it's a lifeline, and it's also destructive, and it's also, creative, right? So I don't know. I think it's a perfect title in my opinion. Yeah. And yeah, go ahead.
It's funny to me, some of the like gay slurs that I'm just like, okay, like flamer. Right. It's just like, okay, that's actually like flame is a pretty powerful thing. Or like queen, like people, I mean, like gay people like we call each other queens all the time, right? But like that's like a reclamation. But I've been called a queen before, and I want to be like, oh, I'm the queen. Okay, so does that mean you get to serve me now? Like,
what does that make you?
You make the royal hand. Like, it's interesting when people try to use words. And I don't know. I think.
Well,
I don't know. I think I like that you can take something that someone's thrown at you and throw it back in their face.
Or even use it to create like a beautiful masterpiece.
Or that.
Okay. So thank you for the background on that.
Yeah.
I have another process question, actually. So how would you describe the differences between setting about writing a book for kids and a graphic novel? Even in terms of the basics, like timelines or skill sets, I don't know, whatever you think would be like the difference.
Yeah, like between a picture book and a graphic novel.
Yeah, thank you. Like,
so
for example, right.
Yeah, so picture books actually have a very strict format, which is it can be 32 pages or it can be 40 pages. Rarely it can be 48 pages. And for book nerds out there who may already know this, but others may not. So it's it depends on the signatures, right? The way the binding works. So it's
interesting.
It's like 8 sheets of paper. Creates one signature, so that's sewn in the middle and folded in half, so you get 16 pages. So it has to be like multiples of 8.
Okay.
That's how they get those numbers, 32 or 40. And then, they stick to 32 or 40 because you don't want to make a book that's too long for an emerging reader, right? That's the point of picture books. They're tools to introduce the littles to words.
Right.
Then they use the pictures to help them learn to read and learn storytelling and comprehension, yada, yada, yada.
Right.
So a graphic novel, there's not that limitation. I would say it can be really challenging to write a picture book because you have to compress so much into those very few pages. In the graphic novel, even though it's still the same idea, like, oh, you have to have a page count that's a multiple of 8, you can just keep adding on, So that was quite liberating to just be able to write as long as I wanted to. And something that served me in the graphic novel format that I learned from picture books is a page turn. So that's a device that basically is like, it's kind of like a little cliffhanger on each page that kind of propels the reader forward, like, oh, what happens? What happens? So if you're reading a picture book, usually there will be like visual momentum that kind of leads the viewer to the lower right-hand corner of the page. That's like, oh, next. And so that's definitely something that I incorporated into making this book. I tried to have kind of a complete scene, but then that last panel, like there should be a little something that's going to make you want to turn the page. So that definitely was an old chestnut that I used. Something new for graphic novels. I mean, obviously there's, working sequentially, like working in panels is different.
Right.
And as a comic book reader, is kind of used to how that flow works. Like, and I have a bunch of books on making comics that have helped. But something I wasn't prepared for as an illustrator or designer is the actual space for type. Like working with word balloons was very new for me and very challenging. And it was really getting on my nerves because I was a graphic designer for years. So when I'm working on my picture books, I'm like, oh, no problem. I've got, I know how to like lay type.
Right.
But then this is a different animal. There's like, okay, like trying to wrap my head around like, okay, there's a balloon here, there's a balloon here. I don't know how much room necessarily that font's going to take up. And that font, by the way, is actually based on my handwriting.
Ooh.
So yeah, Macmillan hired a fancy typographer to turn my handwriting into a font.
Curato Light?
Curato.otf.
Oh, okay.
Light, yes, light, flaming light. So I had an assistant who helped me with production work on this book, and like, so she scanned all the stuff in, and I created a template for her. And when we were first laying out the book, we discovered that there wasn't room like for all of the words. So I literally added 30 pages to the story.
So also
to make the words fit.
So 30 pages of new illustration as well. Wow.
Yeah, but this is before I went to like do the final illustration work.
Sure.
So that's why I always mock everything up, right? Measure twice, cut once. So
yep.
It's funny though, because having to add those 30 pages kind of gave me room to expand some scenes visually. And I couldn't imagine it being shorter now that it's done. Like, I don't know what I would cut visually looking at it now. So yeah, the words and the illustrations really do inform each other.
Okay. And you said you started, you think, around 2011, is that right?
Yeah, I had the idea around then, I think, and then kind of worked on it on and off. And then I think in 2014, I sat down and like finished writing it. And then we sold it, I think, in 2015.
And when you say you sat down and wrote it, let us know, what does that mean? Like, does it mean write the story or?
Yeah, basically I wrote a script.
Okay.
So not much different from a screenplay. That's the format that's kind of typical for submitting a graphic novel manuscript.
Okay.
So you're writing, all the words, and you're also adding like scene notes, art notes, kind of describing to the editor, like, here's what happens, here's what's happening visually that you don't see in the type, which is very different from how I work with picture books. Usually I'll sketch, I'll write about the sketches, I'll sketch about the writing, I go back and forth. Whereas this was very much just like focusing on story. And then the art development came later. But I submitted a full manuscript and then an art sample,
Okay.
which did change. But
and then so once from that point until publication, how long was that?
Oh, so my editor who edits Little Elliot bought the book, but we had other projects that had a higher priority. So Flamer got kind of put on the back burner for a few years while I worked on that and a few other titles with other publishers. And then finally, I don't know, maybe like 2.5 years ago is when I actually got to start, maybe 2 years ago is when I started actually illustrating it. And then, yeah, I think I finished the illustrations like the beginning of the year. And then it was kind of like a quick a quick haul to get it designed and get it out there. But usually you have to wait a whole year between handing off the final art and seeing a book on a shelf. So
yeah.
And
at this point now, you've had many books come out, but I'm curious, what's it like? What was it like specifically with Flamer when you knew it's shipped and it was in the hands of readers?
I mean, that's always a thrill, right? I mean, you get, this just arrives in the mail one day, and I have this tradition when I get my book for the first time, I always like to knock on it, just to be like, it's real.
Yeah.
So, but this one felt different. Just knowing that there are folks that need it and other queer books. Like I want to support other authors who want to make, more queer books for youth.
Yeah.
So yeah, and even the years leading up to publication, I see stories in the news of awful things that would happen to queer youth or that they would do to themselves. And maybe now will be a good time just to give a shout out to the Trevor Project. They are an amazing organization, and they specialize in supporting queer youth. They have like suicide prevention hotline, and lots of resources about suicide prevention. And they have lots of statistics, and I mean, they're the source if you want to find out what's going on. They just came out with a new survey. And in that survey, it's quite clear that queer youth are at much higher risk of suicide, self-harm, homelessness. If that queer youth is a person of color or trans or both, those risks start to rise exponentially. So you could check out the trevorproject.org for more info, or if you want to support them in any way, they could use the help.
Thank you for the shout out. And as someone who's read the book twice now, I just know that this is going to impact many kids and probably many adults as well. So the work you've done impacted me. I want to make sure you know that, and I personally can't wait to keep sharing it. So thank you.
Thanks.
And one more question before we start the Q&A, but
yes.
So what's next for Mike Curato? What's one thing you're looking forward to next?
I am about to illustrate a book that I wrote last summer, a picture book. So I'm excited to get back to doing some picture book work, and it's a precious story. So I'm kind of looking forward to. It's still very emotional, but not quite as intense. So it'll be nice to kind of like step back for a moment. Yeah. But meanwhile, I'm also thinking of ideas for new graphic novels. So kicking that around. Some people have been asking, like, are we gonna, see Aiden again? And it's something I've always considered, but
Aiden goes to college, maybe. I don't know.
Maybe, yeah.
Well, whatever it is, I can't wait to see it.
Thanks.
Yeah, of course. Okay, so we do have a bunch of questions. So
Oh, great.
let's get some asked. So the first one, let's go with Nelson Rodriguez Rivas.
Hi, Nelson.
Hey, Nelson. Their question is, on the screen now. Growing up, what mainstream comic queer characters did you love or did you wish were treated better? Do any of those issues continue to happen now in the mainstream comics world?
Well, I think the thing for me when I was a kid was that I didn't have a queer comic book character to look up to. I feel like the mainstream comics didn't really take a chance on having an out queer character for a really long time. Like that's more recent, really.
Yeah.
I was a huge X-Men fan, and I think you'll meet a lot of like gay X-Men fans because the whole idea of being a misfit with like fabulous powers is like very relatable. Like they're good people who are trying to help humanity even though humanity don't want them. And it's just like, oh, check. So I was screaming when years later Iceman came out of the closet. I was like, oh, Bobby Drake's so cute. Oh my God. Yeah, so I wish I had queer characters, but it's exciting to see characters come out that the comic book publishers are letting writers like take some of their old school characters there, and then seeing just not just new characters but new titles that kind of break the mold. So that's exciting. Yeah.
Great. Okay, next question is from Archangel Co. I've seen a lot of fledgling comic creators worry about making something identity-based when they still feel a little worried or uncertain of their own identity. Can you relate and maybe offer some advice?
Yeah, I think, I get that. But I would say, why not just write what you want to write? And you don't necessarily have to share it yet. And maybe it can be an exercise in saying the things you want to say. I mean, this is the really important thing I think about writing is you can't self-edit when you're writing and developing. You have to just let everything out on the page, and you can always edit later. My agent told me when I was writing this book, there were definitely things that I was like, I don't know, should I go here? And she said, just write. Like, don't get in your own way. Just write it, and we'll see what the publisher says. And I put things in here that I was like, they're definitely not going to let me do this, and 0 scenes got cut from the book.
Wow.
Basically, it was just anything that got edited was more grammatical, or there was maybe like a plot thing where they're like, oh, this has to be this day because this other thing happens on the other day. Anyway, so it's just logistics and grammar that got corrected. But anyway, I think don't limit yourself, and also comics and fantasy, metaphor are great tools to talk about something from a different angle, that you don't necessarily have to write about literally. And then you can end up with a more interesting story also, if it's maybe a little more fantastic.
For sure. I mean, Flamer's a great example of that. All right. So another question actually from Archangel KO. For the page count, does that also have to include the non-story pages like acknowledgements, title page, etc.? Is that planned and factored in ahead of time alongside the number of story pages?
Yes. But again, with the graphic novel format, you don't really need to worry too much about the page count because you can keep adding. I'd say it's more picture books. You need to be very cognizant of, okay, this page is reserved for title and legal copy and dedication. These are the end papers. And you can find some resources online if you're interested in picture books that kind of show you your options with the layouts, because it takes a minute to kind of wrap your head around it. Because there are a few different things you can do with it.
Thank you. All right, our next question is from a familiar face name, Mariana Wickman.
Mariana Wickman, hello.
Mariana is asking, hi Mike, what's the hardest part in the book writing process for you? Is it the same with each book? How do you push past it?
Yeah, good question. I think the hardest, and okay, what I like to say, what I have said about this book these days when I get asked about how I felt writing it was the hardest and easiest thing I've ever made, right? And I think the hardest and easiest part is that honesty, right? That inner truth that is true. Like, it's not debatable. Like, I am who I am. That's not really up for debate. And putting that into the story is easy because I know it. But it's also so hard because, you're being so vulnerable. So I'd say the vulnerability of making a story is the hardest part of it, but it's also what is going to pay off in the long run, because that's what's going to connect with people, because they'll feel that honesty or they'll see that truth in themselves. So yeah, I'd say the hardest part is just being able to go to those really sensitive places that you don't necessarily always share with strangers or even people you know.
And this is not a viewer question, it's my question, follow up to that. Like from a technique point of view, a technique of getting unstuck, what works for you? Like if you are stuck with a certain page or anytime you're stuck, what tricks work for you to get unstuck?
Well, when you've got a really large book like this, one helpful thing is being able to move around the project, right? So say I was feeling particularly vulnerable one day and just like I couldn't handle a scene emotionally, I could go work on a different part of the book.
Yeah.
Whether that's the writing or the illustration. I mean, there were illustrations I saved for the end because it was just a lot. And I had other things going on in my own life. So it's just like, I can't keep layering all these feelings. I need to work on a fart joke right now. But otherwise, I mean, and then there are the days where it's like, I'm just not feeling creative, right? That's real. I think there are days that's just like, it's an admin day. Like, I've got plenty of emails I need to catch up on. I've got plenty of chores to do. And then the tricky thing is finding the balance of like, well, you can't have too many admin days. And so for days where I'm kind of on the fence, it's like, okay, you go for a walk, right? I mean, lots of people say it, but it's true. Like, going for a walk, being around trees. Yeah. I know that's hard when you're in the city, but find a tree with friends, become a plant person. I don't know.
Yeah.
But just finding ways to unplug. One great tool that I haven't used it in a minute, but I've used the Pomodoro timer, which is kind of like an interval timer where you maybe work for I forget what the intervals are, but it's like you work for 45 minutes, then you get a 15-minute break, then you work for another 45, you get a half an hour break, then you 45, another 15 break, something like that. So when there are days that I, because I'm just by myself, right? So sometimes I need the structure of telling me like, you can wait to check Instagram 15 more minutes. And then other than that, I mean, I think it's so challenging, especially right now with COVID, because there are so many things I used to do to get inspired, like go to a museum or take a trip. So that's something I've been kind of working on still, is like, attending things like this online, or friend time is so valuable now. Like, so sometimes it's like, okay, I've scheduled like a backyard hangout. So, just, and then of course, if you have a writing community of your own, I think it's important just to have those people that you can say like, I am stuck. Can you read this? Or can I whine to you for a few minutes? So yeah, all those things.
Okay, well, that was a lot. I mean, there was a nice range of techniques. Thank you. We have 2 minutes, and there's one last question from Ms. Samantha Berger. And the question is there another story you feel as compelled to tell in your lifetime?
Maybe. I can't give away all my secrets, but yeah, of course. And that, earlier when I said like, oh, I may have some other graphic novel ideas, there are like these kind of themes or things I want to talk about. Oh yeah. Okay. I think I'll never run out of things to talk about. Like,
Great. Well, speaking of running out of time, we have probably 30 seconds. So I just want to first thank you, Mike. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you. We learned a lot today. I want to thank everyone that tuned in. I want to thank the Talks at Google team, the Pride at Google group, the Filipino Googler Network. Thank you all so much for your support and attendance. And if you want to buy Mike's book, it's available at most booksellers. Bookshop.org is a great destination where you can get it. Thank you again so much. And Mike, until next time, until your next graphic novel.
Thanks, Michael, and thanks, Google.
See you.